This is an epic story of courage and the fight for freedom about the Spartans, the people who valued freedom above all else. Just as the Jews refused to serve Rome and retreated to Masada and lived there in squalid conditions just to preserve their freedom and dignity. So the Spartans decided to go out to fight an army that had never been seen before. However, the Spartans knew the price of freedom and therefore did not hesitate in their intention to defend Sparta, the Peloponnese, and the rest of Hellas. On the other hand, this is the story of a king who rose above all other rulers known to the world up to that time. About King Xerxes or Xerxes, who inherited the largest kingdom known up to that time. The kingdom stretched from India in the east through Egypt and Babylon to Europe. Xerxes believed that only Hellas stood in his way of dominating the whole world, and since most of the Greek polis city-states decided to recognize his authority out of fear of such a large army, only Athens and Sparta remained on the defense of Hellas. To avenge his father Darius and the defeat on the field of Marathon, Xerxes prepared an army of over 1.5 million people, according to Herodotus. He built previously unimaginable construction works such as the Hellespont Bridge in today's Bosphorus, thus connecting Asia and Europe. And after that, he dug a canal near Mount Athos to ensure safe passage for his previously unprecedented naval fleet. Xerxes did all this to rule the whole world and to turn all its inhabitants into servants and slaves. On that road, the last obstacle was Athens and Sparta. The beginning of this story leads us towards a mysterious clue. Let's listen to what is found in the second book of Maccabees in chapter 12. The books of the Maccabees are included in the biblical canons of some Christian churches. However, most Christians and Jews consider these books to be only historical writings and not inspired by God because they do not agree with some of the verses in them. However, the books about the Maccabees and the uprising of the Maccabees against the occupation contain some very interesting details. One of them is Jeremiah's hiding in the Covenant Ark during the Babylonian occupation, which we will talk about in a special show. What interests us here is the 12 chapters of the second book of the Maccabees, of 6 verses in which the high priest of Jerusalem, Jonathan, writes a letter to the Spartan king, and the text itself tells us like this. The high priest Jonathan, the national council, the priests and the rest of the Jewish people greet their Spartan brothers. Arius, who reigned among you, had already sent a letter to the high priest Onias confirming that you are our brothers, as the attached transcript shows. Onias received the man who had been sent with honors and received a letter that spoke of alliance and friendship. As for us, and if we did not need it, since we have the holy books at our disposal for consolation, we tried to send someone to restore the brotherhood and friendship that binds us with you, so that we don't become estranged from you, because a lot of time has passed since your mission. We always remember you at all times and on every occasion. About the holidays and other festive days when we offer sacrifices and pray, as is proper and appropriate to remember our brothers. We look forward to your glory. During the time of the Assyrian Empire, around 720 BC, the 10 tribes of Israel were displaced from the area that God had assigned to each of the 12 tribes in the Holy Scriptures. These 10 tribes are known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The part we heard from the second book of Maccabees tells how the high priest of Jerusalem and the Jewish congregation repeatedly refer to the Spartans as their brothers. Herodotus's history mentions several times the fact that the Spartans differ from all other Hellenes in that their law is above all else, and that they can defend their law with honor and life if necessary. This attitude toward the law is mainly related to the Jews in the Holy Scriptures. Another fact mentioned in the book of Maccabees is that the Jews remember the Spartans and mention them when they celebrate holidays and offer sacrifices. We know that the biblical holidays separated the people of Israel from all other peoples, so this story is even more interesting. But let's start from the beginning and see what happened during the Second Persian Hellenic War and how it came about.
We are at the site of the Thermopylae, at the site of the most famous ancient battle, where the Hellenes led by Leonidas and 300 Spartans met a huge Persian army with Emperor Xerxes. We know about it from the book of Herodotus, the father of history. And who is Herodotus?
Herodotus was born around 484 BC in Halicarnassus, a Greek city on the territory of today's Turkey. His birthplace was part of the Achaemenid Empire, which means that he grew up in the middle where Greek and Persian cultures met. This geographical and political environment played a key role in shaping his interest in researching different peoples, customs, and historical events. The time in which Herodotus lived was extremely dynamic and turbulent. The Greeks faced enormous challenges in the form of Persian campaigns, which culminated in the legendary battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. These events, together with the political and cultural and economic development of the Greek polis, form the foundations of the historical framework recorded by Herodotus. His work is largely concerned with the Persian Wars, but it extends further, providing a broader context about the different civilizations that shaped the world at that time. Herodotus's most famous work, the History, consists of 9 books, each named after one of the 9 muses. He intended to record historical works so that they would not be lost to time and to provide explanations for the causes of the conflict between the Greeks and the Persians. This work is considered the first attempt to record historical events based on research and testimonies, and not solely on myths and oral tradition. Herodotus traveled all over the then known world. He visited Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Scythia, and many other regions, recording the customs, culture, and history of those peoples. His method involved gathering information from various sources. He talked to local residents, studied artifacts, and compared different stories to come up with the most accurate depiction. Although he still used myths and legends when there was no hard evidence, Herodotus made a clear distinction between what he heard and what he could verify. Although Herodotus lived in a time when myths and legends were an integral part of every story, his work represents an important step toward a scientific approach to history. He often records different versions of the same event, openly admitting when he is unsure of the accuracy of the information. For example, in the Histories, Herodotus describes Egyptian customs and religion in detail, but always emphasizes the difference between what he was told and what he saw himself. Although more than 2,500 years have passed since Herodotus's time, his work still fascinates. His research approach, his focus on the causes and consequences of events, and his ability to see the world as a whole make him relevant even today. Herodotus reminds us of the importance of documenting the past and learning from it, as well as the need to integrate the stories of different peoples into a common narrative that enriches humanity. In this video, we will dive deeper into the world of Herodotus, explore the key moments of the Second Persian-Greek War, and analyze history as a work that changed the way we perceive the past. Get ready to travel through time, where you will discover the story of a man who, despite the limitations of his age, laid the foundations of modern historiography. The very beginning of the story takes us to Persia and Xerxes' expedition to Greece, an epic collision of 2 civilizations, 2 cultures, and 2 views of the world. This story begins far before the first battle cries and clash of swords. At a time when mighty Persia and divided Greece were carving their paths to a fateful war, the year is 486 BC. Persia is at the height of its power, stretching from India in the east to Egypt in the west. However, dynastic problems and unrest among the peoples of this vast empire threatened to weaken the power of the great king. Xerxes, son of Darius the Great, comes to the throne in turbulent circumstances. His father died in the middle of preparations for a new campaign in Greece. The campaign was supposed to avenge the Persian defeat at Marathon. Xerxes faces the challenge of consolidating power in the empire and continuing his father's mission. Before turning to Greece, Xerxes had put down rebellions in Egypt and Babylon, and he succeeded. But these conflicts drained resources and increased tensions among the diverse peoples of the empire. Xerxes himself, after the campaign in Egypt and Babylon and the conversation with the elders, gives up the campaign on Hellas. But restless dreams do not give him peace. Herodotus writes the following about this in the 7th book of Histories under the name of Polymnius: Xerxes' dream and hesitation. So much was said about it, and when night fell, Xerxes still did not give peace to what Artabanus had told him. Thinking about everything at night, he concluded that it was not convenient to go to war against Hellas. After making such a decision, he fell asleep and, as the Persians say, he had a dream like this. He dreamed that a big, handsome man came to him and said, "You have changed your mind again, Persian, and you will not lead an army against Hellas, although you have already ordered the Persians to gather an army. You didn't do well to change your mind, nor am I here to forgive you. But what you decided to do today, you have to do." And it seemed to Xerxes that the man flew away after those words. And when it dawned, he did not pay attention to that dream, but called the Persians with whom he had previously held an assembly, and spoke to them like this: "Persians, forgive me for changing my mind so quickly. I have not yet gone so far as to think that I am the smartest, and I never reject those who give me advice on what to do from the side. As I listened to Artaban's opinion, my youthful blood immediately boiled, and I attacked the man with more obscene words than was necessary. But now that I have thought it over, I have decided to follow his advice. You can live in peace because I have changed my mind and will not make war against Hellas." Hearing this, the Persians fell at his feet for joy and kissed his curds. And when night fell, and as soon as Xerxes fell asleep, the same apparition came to him again in his dream and said to him, "Son of Darius, it seems you have given up on leading the Persians to war. Are you looking back at my words so much and pretending that you never heard them from anyone? So remember well that this will happen to you if you don't immediately lead the army to Hellas. Just as you have become great and powerful in a short time, so you will quickly become nobody and nothing." Xerxes was terribly frightened by the dream, so he jumped out of bed and immediately sent a messenger to fetch Artabanus. At that time, Greece was far from unity. Greek polises such as Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and Thebes are independent city-states, often embroiled in rivalries. While Persia boasts a centralized government and a huge army, Greece is divided into dozens of polises with different political systems, interests, and visions. Athens prides itself on its democracy, navy, and cultural achievements, while Sparta, the embodiment of the military spirit, builds its power on a disciplined land army. However, there are deep divisions among the Hellenes, often caused by the struggle for supremacy and resources. Although some polities have cooperated in the past, such as the joint resistance against the Persians during Darius' campaign, at the dawn of war, unity and solidarity among the Greeks is rare. Xerxes was no ordinary ruler. He was ambitious and determined to avenge his father's defeat. His plan included not only military victory, but also the complete submission of Greece under Persian rule. He gathered the largest army of his time for the campaign. Historiography estimates that the army numbered over 200,000 soldiers, although Herodotus himself claims that there were 1,700,000 of them, with allies from all parts of the empire: Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, and Scythians. All were part of this multinational force. Along with the army, Xerxes formed a huge navy that numbered over 1,200 ships to ensure logistical support and dominance at sea. Xerxes implemented grandiose engineering projects to ensure the smooth passage of his troops. The bridges over the Hellespont and the canal through the Athos Peninsula testify to the vast resources and logistical capacity of Persia. Herodotus describes the construction of the bridge over the Hellespont on the Bosporus as follows: "That is why certain Phoenicians and Egyptians built 2 bridges from Abydos to this place on the coast. The Phoenicians built the one from white linen and the Egyptians from hemp. The space between Abid and the opposite bank is 7 furlongs. And when the bridges were finished, a terrible storm arose that tore them apart and destroyed them. Upon learning of this, Xerxes became angry and ordered that the Hellespont be beaten with 300 lashes and that the sea be chained. And I heard that he immediately sent his sealers with these to put a shameful mark on the Hellespont. He also ordered them to address him with these insulting and indecent words while they were beating him. "O treacherous water! The master is punishing you for insulting him even if he did not hide anything from you. King Xerxes will pass over you, whether you like it or not. No one will bring you dirty and bitter water as a punishment." So he ordered them to punish the sea and ordered the heads of the leaders of the construction of the bridge over the Hellespont to be cut off. Those who were assigned this ungrateful duty did it, and other bridges were built by other builders. They built them like this. Ships with 50 oars and ships with 3 rows of oars are lined up. Under the bridge that was on the Black Sea side, 360 ships were placed, and 314 under the other bridge, so that their sterns were facing the Black Sea and their beaks in the direction of the current of the Hellespont, so that the current would keep the ropes taut. When they assembled the ships, they threw huge anchors into the sea, one next to the bridge on the Black Sea side due to the winds blowing from that side, and the other on the west side of the bridge towards the Aegean Sea, again due to the west and south winds. They set up passageways for ships, between ships with 3 rows of oars and ships with 50 oars, so that small ships could be sailed to the Black Sea and vice versa at will. When they have done that, they then tighten the ropes from the land using wooden pulleys. Not a single bridge was tied with only one type of rope, but each one was tied with 2 white linen ropes and 4 hemp ropes. The thickness and beauty of their workmanship were the same, but of course, the linen one was much heavier because the cubit of that rope weighed 1 talent. When the strait was thus bridged, they sawed logs of wood to a length equal to the breadth of the floating supports, and laid them in order on the taut cables. After placing them together, they then made them fast. After doing this, they carried brushwood onto the bridge. When this was all laid in order, they heaped earth on it and stamped it down. Then they made a fence on either side so that the beasts of burden and horses would not be frightened by the sight of the sea below them. When the bridges and the work at Athos were ready, and both the dikes at the channel's entrances, built to prevent the surf from silting up the entrances of the long passage, and the channel itself were reported to be now completely finished, the army then wintered. At the beginning of spring, the army made ready and set forth from Sardis to march to Abydos. Another grandiose engineering project was the digging of a channel near Mount Athos, today's Mount Athos, because Darius, father of Xerxes, lost a large fleet in the first Persian attack in the shade. To avoid a similar scenario, Xerxes ordered a channel to be dug in front of Athos. Herodotus describes it like this: "And since they suffered great losses when they sailed around Athos for the first time, now they are on Athos, where preparatory works were already carried out 3 years earlier. Namely, in Elontus, warships were moored and workers of various nationalities were brought to Athos from those ships, and under the blows of the beings they dug and replaced each other. Residents from the vicinity of Athos worked on the digging. The works were managed by the Persians, Bubarus, son of Megabazus, and Artaius, son of Artachius. Athos is a large and famous mountain that rises above the sea and is inhabited by people. Athos has the shape of a peninsula, and in the part where the mountain meets the mainland, there is an isthmus 12 stadia wide. The isthmus is flat, and there are small hills on it from the Acanthian Sea to the Tyrrhenian Sea on the other side. On the same isthmus where Athos ends, there is the Hellenic city of Sana, and behind the city of Sana in the interior of Athos, there are mainland cities that the Persians then wanted to turn into island cities. These are the cities located in Athos. They lightly dug through the isthmus. The barbarians near the city of Sana'a marked the direction of digging with ropes and divided the land designated for digging among various peoples. When the trench was already deeper, Those who stood at the very bottom dug, and others added the excavated earth to those who stood on the ladder above them. And they added it up again, and then they took it out and scattered it. The slopes of the pit were collapsing for everyone and giving them double work. Only this did not happen to the Phoenicians. This happened to them because the upper opening of the pit and the bottom were the same width. And the Phoenicians, as usual, showed their insight in this work as well. When their share was measured for them, they began to dig a pit twice as wide as it should have been. And while digging, they gradually narrowed it. And when they reached the bottom, it was as wide as the others. There was also a fort where they gathered and traded, and large quantities of flour came to them from Asia. In my opinion, Xerxes ordered the excavation of Athos out of vanity because he wanted to show his power and leave behind a monument. They could easily pull the ships across the isthmus, but he still ordered to dig a channel so wide that 2 ships with 3 rows of oars could sail through it side by side.
It is on this coast where we are now that the waves of the sea are coming, washing over the beach. It was the beginning, or northern end of the Xerxes Channel. So when Emperor Xerxes decided not to experience the fate of his father Darius, and not to experience the disaster that happened beyond Mount Athos, he came right here, and decided that in this place where the site of Nea Rhoda is today, he should start digging a channel through which all his fleet would pass. So, just as today, there is a small port in the place of Nea Rhoda in Greece, at the very entrance to Athos. Once the Emperor Xerxes decided to withdraw his navy here, according to Herodotus, 3,000 ships, of which 1,200 were larger, were supposed to pass through here. The channel was so large that, as Herodotus writes, 2 ships with 3 rows of oars could pass each other, without touching, truly an imposing work. If we know that over 2,500 years have passed since then, Xerxes decided to show his force right here, although Herodotus says that he might not have to do it, that there were enough people, that the ships could have been transferred to the other side. However, Xerxes decided to show the power and strength of his empire and ordered a channel to be dug here. Right from this beach here was the beginning of the channel. Precisely in this place, in today's place of Tripiti, on the other side, therefore, at the entrance to Mount Athos, on the other side. The channel that was dug by the king or Emperor Xerxes ended here. So, here we are reminded of that by this remnant of the channel, that kind of swamp, a pile of reeds that shows the width that was from this hill, there to this hill, and this beach that was left behind all that. Therefore, the desire of the Emperor Xerxes to come and dominate Europe was so great that no natural obstacle was allowed to stand in his way. In addition to taming the Dardanelles, which crossed into Europe, he also made this imposing work and decided to fight with Sparta, Athens and other inhabitants of Hellas.
While Xerxes was preparing for the invasion, the Greeks were trying to overcome their divisions. The Hellenic League was formed, led by Athens and Sparta, but many politicians were indecisive. The Spartans took the lead on land, while Athens led the defense at sea. However, their cooperation was the result of necessity rather than true unity, while some policies, such as Sparta and Athens, resolutely planned resistance. Others, such as Thebes, considered surrender or cooperation with the Persians. This discord made it even more difficult to organize a common front. The role of the Thessalians, who were known for the best cavalry among the Greeks, was especially important. Another important ally was Syracuse in Sicily, ruled by Gellion. What Gellion said to the envoys of Sparta and Athens is recorded by Herodotus in his book. And when the Hellenic envoys came to Syracuse, they came before him and declared to him, "We were sent by the Spartans and their allies to ask you to ally against the barbarians who are now threatening Hellas. Surely you know that the Persian king built a bridge over the Hellespont and raised all the military force from the east of Asia and is going with it to Hellas under the pretext that he wants to attack the Athenians. But in fact, he wants to conquer all of Hellas. You have great power, and as the Lord of Sicily, you are considered one of the strongest rulers in Hellas. So help us in the fight for Hellas' freedom and take part in that fight. If the entire Hellas unites, it will be possible to gather a powerful army, and we will be able to oppose the attacker. But if some of us are traitors and others do not want to rush to help, and few will have the courage to defend the Hellada, then the whole Hellada will be in danger of ruin. Therefore, do not think that the Persians, having defeated us, will not attack you as well. But make sure that you prevent it, because by helping us, you will help yourself in the first place. Any well-prepared and planned job usually always succeeds well." That was their statement, and Gellion got very angry at them and declared, "How dare you, Hellenes, who speak so insolently, to call me for help against the barbarians? And then when I begged you with the Cahedonians to send me to help against the barbarian army, and when I begged you to take revenge on the Aegistaeus for the death of Dorius son of Alexandrides, then when I even promised you that I would help you free your trading cities from which you had so much income and so much benefit, you did not want to come to my aid or feel the death of Dorius. And according to you, everything would fall into the hands of the barbarians. But despite that, we have progressed and we are getting better and better. And now that the war has come again and your skin is at stake, you have remembered Gellion again. And if you insulted me, I will not act as you did, but I will come to your aid and bring with me 200 triremes, 20,000 armored men, 2,000 horsemen, 2,000 archers, 2,000 slingers, and 2,000 lightly armed horsemen. And I take it upon myself to supply the entire Hellenic army with food for the duration of the war. All this I promise to give on the condition that I will be given the command of the whole army in the war against the barbarians. Otherwise, I will neither come to help myself nor send others." When Seagar heard this, he could not help but say, Pelopidagus Memnon would certainly have turned over in his grave when he heard that the Spartans had to cede the supreme command of the army to Gellion and the Syracusans. There is no question of giving you the supreme command, but if you really want to come to the aid of Hellas, know that you will be under the command of the Spartans. If you don't agree to that, then don't even come to our aid. Gellion's negotiations with the Hellenic envoys. And when Gellion saw that Seagar rejected his propositions with contempt, he at length declared to them this: "My Spartan friend, insults provoke ordinary anger in a man. Although you spoke in an insulting tone, yet you will not provoke me to answer you in the same rude manner. When you attach so much importance to the supreme command, then I have more rights to it, and I have a much larger army, and many more ships than you. But when that proposal stings your eyes so much, we will partially abandon the original proposal. If you are so keen to command the land army, then I will command the fleet, or if it pleases you to command the fleet, then I want to command the land army. And it remains for you either to agree to it or to return and renounce the alliance under these conditions. Gelon set those conditions. The Athenian messenger preceded the Spartan messenger and answered him like this: King of the Syracusans, the Hellenes did not send us to ask you to send a commander to Hellas, but an army. You say that you will not send an army to Hellas unless you are the supreme commander of the Hellenic forces, and you strive with all your might to command the army. When you first demanded the supreme command of all the military forces, we Athenians thought it necessary to remain silent because we thought that a Spartan would be sufficient to answer you in the name of both. And now that you have given up asking for the supreme command of all the military forces and are demanding to be given the command of the fleet, here is the answer to that. Even if a Spartan agreed to give you command of the fleet, we would not agree to it in any case. It belongs to us in case the Spartans do not want to receive it. And because the Spartans are willing to take command and at sea, we are not against it at all. But in no case would we hand over that command to someone else. We would not, in fact, be the greatest naval power in Hellas if we had to leave the supreme command of the fleet to the Syracusans. And we Athenians, the oldest nation in Hellene, the only one of all the Hellenic peoples who did not move from their homeland, and for whom, in the poet Homer said, that one of the most distinguished Athenians came to Troy to form and organize an army, and we are proud to say that Gelon refuses to help Hellas. Angelon answered him thus: Friend from Athens, you have learned that you have commanders, and you will not have those who will listen. So if you are not even willing to give in and want everything to be in your hands, then hurry to go as soon as possible and tell the Hellenes that spring has been taken from their year. These words had this meaning, namely, just as spring is the most beloved and most beautiful season, surely his army is also the most beautiful of all other Hellenic military formations. And the fact that Hellas was left without his help was likened to the exclusion of spring in the year. Since the Hellenic envoys had thus ended the negotiations with Gelon, they sailed back. In 480 BC, Xerxes crossed the Hellespont and began his invasion of Greece. His army, the size of which was unprecedented in the world at that time, quickly conquered the northern Greek areas, while the Greeks prepared defenses in the gorge between Olympus and Ossa at the entrance to Thessaly, because the Thessalians also decided to defend Hellas, but only if Thessaly will also be defended. Thus, the meeting place was determined to be a gorge at the foot of Olympus, where, according to Hellenic mythology, the gods lived. However, after information that there is another passage in that place so that Xerxes could approach them from behind, this plan is abandoned and a long battle site closer to the Peloponnese is sought. But that leaves Thessaly to Xerxes, so the Thessalians decide not to take part in the battle. How big was Xerxes' army? Herodotus described in detail all the nations that sent their army. He described their uniforms, their weapons, the animals they led, and most importantly, their number and the names of the commanders of each unit. He claims that the number of soldiers that Xerxes counted in the city of Dariscus, which his father Darius built as a fortress, was 1,700,000 people. The question arises as to why modern historiography, of all the above, only questions the number of soldiers while accepting all other details. Let's listen to some parts of the description. Dariscus is a large plain on the Thracian coast through which the great river Ebro flows. On that plain, a royal fortress called Dariscus was built and housed the crew that Darius had stationed there during his campaign against the Scythians. Xerxes thought that this land was suitable for organizing and gathering his army there. So he did so. When the whole fleet arrived in Dariscus, the commanders of the ships, by order of Xerxes, pulled the ships to the coast near Dariscus, where there are only Thracian cities, Sala and Zona. And at the end of that coast is the famous Syrian promontory. That land belonged to the Cicones in ancient times. They landed along that coast, pulled the ships ashore, and left them to dry, while Xerxes counted the army in Dariscus. How many people were spent by each nation? I am not able to say exactly, because no one mentions it anywhere, but it was established that the number of the land army amounted to a total of 1,700,000. The counting was done in this way. They brought 10,000 people to a certain area and crammed them as much as they could, and then they drew a circle around them. Having described a circle and released the 10,000, they built a fence along the line of the circle so high that it was up to a man's navel. When they raised it, they forced other people into that fence, and so on until they counted them all. After the counting is done, they arrange them in a machine according to ethnicity. Who were the foot soldiers and how were they equipped? These nations participated in the war. In the first place were the Persians themselves, who were easily equipped. On their heads, they had soft hats, so-called tiaras, and around their bodies a colorful dress with sleeves and iron plates underneath that looked like fish scales. And on their feet were wide chakshiras, while instead of leather shields, they wore wicker shields with arrow bags hanging underneath. They had short spears, large bows, reed arrows, and in addition, swords that were hung from a belt next to the right thigh. Their commander was Aten. To better understand the Spartans, let's listen to the story of Spercheius in Bullius. After Xerxes sent emissaries to all Greek polises with the request that the Greeks send him land and water as a symbol of submission, most of the polis sent land and water, except Sparta and Athens. The Athenians killed the envoys, and the Spartans threw them into a well and said that they could take land and water there for Xerxes. However, after a while, the Spartans thought that they had not done the right thing and that the gods had turned against them. So they announced that they were looking for 2 Spartans who would voluntarily go to Persia and give their lives to redeem the Spartans' sins. 2 of the richest, Sperchio and Bullia, came forward. On their way to Persia, they stop at the city of a Greek who is a vassal in the Persian Empire. Their conversation reveals what the ideal in life is for the Spartans. The feat of these people is certainly worthy of raving, and besides, these words, when they were traveling to Susa, they came upon Hydarno. Hydarno was a Persian by origin, and the commander of all the troops on the coast of Asia Minor. He received them kindly and asked them during lunch, "Men of Sparta, you should avoid entering into friendship with the king. If you look at me and what I have, you can see how much the king knows how to value virtuous people. In the same way, if you surrendered to the king because the king considered you to be an honorable people, each of you would rule in some part of Hellas by the grace of the king." To that they answered him, "Hydarno, the advice you gave us is not that important to us either. Namely, where you advise us only what you have experienced yourself, and the rest is unknown to you. You only know about slavery, and you have never tasted freedom, and you don't know if it is sweet or not. If you had tasted it, you would not advise us to fight for it, not only with spears, but also with axes." Thus they answered Hydarnus, and when they went from there to Susa and appeared before the king, they at first refused to bow down to him. When the king's companions ordered them and wanted to force them to do it, they said that they would never do it, even if they put them on their heads by force. They said, namely, that there is no such custom among them to bow down to a man, and that is why they did not come. And then when they refused, they addressed them again with these words, "King of the Mets, the Spartans sent us as compensation for those messengers who were killed in Sparta." Although he dug a channel near Athos, Xerxes did not have much luck at sea, just like his father Darius in the first expedition to Hellas. After the passage of Athos and the further advance towards the Peloponnese and Athens, a terrible storm arose which once again decimated the Persian navy. Let's listen to Herodotus's account of it. When the fleet set out and reached the coast of Magnesia between the town of Castania and the Sepiat Ridge, the first ships docked along the coast while the others anchored behind them because there was little space along the coast, and they all stood one behind the other. All 8 in a row with their beaks turned towards the sea. That's how the first night passed, and the sea was calm until before dawn and the sky was clear. But at daybreak it became agitated, and a great storm arose from the east, blowing a strong wind from the east that the local residents call the Hellespontian. Those who felt that the storm was rising, and who were close to the shore, pulled the ships ashore before the storm caught them, and they and their ships were saved. And those ships that the storm found on the open sea, one threw them into the so-called Ipni in furnaces below Pelion, and the others onto the flat shore. Some of them crashed on the Scipiot Ridge, and others were washed ashore near the town of Melibea and near Hastinea. The storm was terrible. As Xerxes' army approached, the Hellenic League decided that the key point of resistance would be at the narrow gorge of Thermopylae. This strategic location allowed the smaller Greek forces to hold off the huge Persian army. The Spartan King Leonidas took command of the allied forces. His army, composed of 300 Spartans and about 9,000 Hellenic soldiers, was small, but all the fighters swore to fight to the death. At the same time, the Greek navy, led by the Athenians, stationed its ships at the Bay of Artemisium, a strategic point that was supposed to prevent the Persian fleet from encircling the land forces at Thermopylae. Xerxes and his army finally reached Thermopylae. Confident of his numerical superiority, he expected a quick victory. He sent messengers to Leonidas, demanding that the Greeks lay down their arms and withdraw. Leonidas' answer was simple but memorable: "Come and get them." Xerxes believed that his numerical superiority would easily crush the Greeks. However, he could not have foreseen how difficult the geographical advantage and the determination of the Spartan soldiers would make his campaign. The Greek soldiers, aware that they were facing an almost invincible enemy, prepared for a heroic fight. Their goal was not only to stop the Persians, but also to defend Greek freedom and honor.
We are located next to the thermal springs in Thermopylae, so these are the sources from which the entire place of Thermopylae got its name. These are the sources of thermal water, and you can feel the magnesium and minerals in the water here. A great place, and actually a fantastic place, where Leonidas decided to make his camp and wait for the Persians, a great army from Asia. This water also allowed the Hellenic soldiers to have access to hot water, and in this case, we also see mineral water. So, in his books, Herodotus writes in detail about what happened at that time and what the battle at Thermopylae looked like. The place where we are is the place of the last battle where, knowing that they will be attacked from all sides, the Spartans decided to set up their last refuge. All around was the sea, and on this side was a gorge of mountains. The only passage for Xerxes' army, which according to Herodotus had over 2 million soldiers, was through this narrow gorge. The entire Hellenic army and the Spartan king Leonidas were celebrated there. Namely, before the actual battle, and before arriving at this place, and before arriving in Hellas, today's Greece. Emperor Xerxes asked Demaratus, who was the exiled Spartan king, who found refuge with Xerxes' father Darius. He asked what those soldiers were really like. Who these Hellenes? How can one nation and the quarreling Greek polis come to one battle and oppose such an army as has not been seen since the beginning of the world? Herodotus himself and other historians claimed Demaratus was an exiled Spartan king who found refuge with Darius. the father of Xerxes, and told me thus, "What I'm going to tell you is the truth. If you want, I'll tell you the truth. The truth is that your soldiers, your entire army, fight out of fear, and fight because you called them and brought them from Asia, from all the enslaved country. They fought out of fear. Many of them were in those battles, and they went forward. However, the Spartans fight for a different reason. They are fighting because the law is above them. No man is above them, and the law is above them. It is a shame for them to withdraw from the battlefield, and they would rather die to be remembered in history." Xerxes thought that was impossible. He laughed. He didn't even believe it at first. But after everything that happened here in the battle itself, he called Demaratus again and said, "How many of those Spartans are there? If only 300 of them managed to hold off the entire army for 3 days, here on this very spot area near the Thermopylae gorge."
Having said this, he still could not convince Xerxes, and he waited for Xerxes for 4 whole days, because he was constantly hoping that they would escape. And since they did not retreat, but, in his opinion, really rudely and madly remained in their positions, he became enraged on the 5th day and sent an army against them, and ordered them to capture them alive and bring them before him. And when the Medes rushed and fell among the Hellenes, many were killed and others took their place, but even they could not force them to retreat even though they attacked fiercely. And then it was clear to everyone, especially the king himself, that he had a lot of people but few heroes. The fight lasted for the whole day. Suffering heavy losses, the Medes retreated imperceptibly, and in their place the Persians entered the fight, namely those whom the region calls immortals, and whose leader was Hydarno, thinking that they would easily overcome with the Hellenes. When they also entered the fight with the Hellenes, they did not have more success than the Medes, but they also had a good time, because they fought on narrow ground and had shorter spears than the Hellenes, and could not use their numerical superiority. The Spartans not only fought heroically to prove that they had a better understanding of the art of war, but they turned their backs on their opponents, and apparently, everyone started to run away. So when the barbarians saw them running away, they shouted and rushed after them, stopping and turned against the barbarians and killed countless Persians. And then several Spartans also fell. When the Persians could not take the gorge by any rush, nor attacks in open battle, they then retreated. It is said that during those fights at the entrance of the gorge, the king who was watching the fight, fearing for the army, jumped from his throne 3 times. That is how they fought then. And the next day the barbarians did not fight with better results either. They continued to attack because they hoped that Hellenes, since they were few, would all like the wound and that they would not be able to remove it with their hands. And the Hellenes were lined up by nationalities and all fought in turn and in order except the Phocaeans. These, in turn, were given the task of occupying the path in the mountain. And when the Persians achieved nothing more than the previous day, they retreated again. And while Xerxes was in a predicament and did not know what to do, a Malian entered his audience. The latter hoped that the king would richly reward him and reveal to him the path that leads through the mountain to Thermopylae, and thus destroy all the Hellenes who were there.
The betrayal was done by Ephialtes, who was Greek and who showed the Persians another passage that leads around through the mountains, through a gorge. The Phocaeans, who lived in this area in fear of the Thessalians, who lived further north, held this gorge and built a wall there. According to many beliefs at that time, when you say wall, you actually mean one tower on one fortress, then it didn't just mean a wall, but the wall is what remained in Herodotus tradition. They built walls to narrow even that narrow gorge, and they knew very well about another approach that existed on the other side of the hill. Ephialtes revealed this approach to the Persians, expecting a great reward for it. He was later killed, and the Phocaeans guarded the second approach with their 1,000 armored men. On the 3rd day, Hydarno led the army sent by Xerxes, which marched from the other side. Hearing about this, Leonidas decided to dismiss all the other Hellenes and send them home because he knew that defeat was certain. but since military honor did not allow the Spartans to retreat from this position, they remained and died bravely to the last. As many as 4 times 300 Spartans in the last day managed to make the Persians flee. However, after the fall of Leonidas in this very place, according to tradition, according to legend, they gathered. This position, this elevation, was specially chosen because there was sea on all 3 sides here. The sea used to reach all the way here, and there were cliffs, so the fortification was such that they were protected on 3 sides by the sea, and the only approach was on the other side, where the Persians had to approach uphill. This is how the legend of the 300 Spartans and the famous King Leonidas was born, who managed to stop the Persians for 3 days here. And that victory, even though they all perished, was something that later inspired the Athenians and the Spartans to fight so bravely at Salamis and on Plataea, and to achieve a great victory over the Asian army in Xerxes' second campaign. This battle itself, which took place in this area, was more than a battle. It actually meant something similar to today. The collision of 2 worlds, something that has been happening all the time throughout history. Xerxes' army was made up of soldiers from Egypt, India, the area of today's Afghanistan, Central Asia, the entire Middle East, Persia, Thracians, a good part of Asia Minor, and a good part of these Greeks who decided to peacefully accept Xerxes' rule. It was also a clash of 2 worlds, the clash of the Hellenic world, in which freedom was something inviolable, human freedom in which philosophy and various other sciences were created, and the clash of the world coming from Asia, oppressed, slave-owning in which the only argument was force. The collision of these 2 worlds happened many more times throughout history, and on the Kosovo field. We had a similar battle where the Kosovo fighters were inspired by Leonidas and his victory in this place, and even though he died, his name is still remembered, and he has remained synonymous with the struggle for the freedom of a free man.
Parallel to the battle on land, there was also a naval battle in Artemisium, which is located near Thermopylae. Thus began the naval battle at Artemisium. When the Hellenes saw that they were sailing towards them, it was clear to them that they had made a mistake. So they attacked them and captured them without any trouble. On one of these ships was captured Herodotus, the tyrant from Alabanda in Korea, and on the other was Pentylas, son of Demoneus, who had brought 12 ships and lost 11 of them in a storm at Sepiades. He sailed in the only remaining ship, and he was captured by Artemisius. When the Hellenes listened to them and learned everything they wanted about Xerxes' army, they sent them in chains to the Isthmus of Corinth. And the barbarian fleet, except for those 15 ships commanded by Sanduc, as I said before, came to Ephrata. Thermopylae became the stage for one of the most famous battles in history. While Xerxes' army waited for the signal to attack, the Spartan soldiers prepared for a battle that would go down in legend. Just as 2,500 years ago, the Spartans and the Athenians defended the right of man to freedom, Such a scenario was repeated throughout history. From the east came hordes and huge armies whose rulers wanted to rule the whole world. From the pharaohs in Egypt, through Babylon, Persia, and the Ottoman Empire. All these empires were based on tyranny and slavery. The idea of personal freedom existed among Hellenes and the Jews. Hence the folk proverb, "Battle does not beat light weapons, but battle beats the heart of a hero."